All right, so get ready because today we're diving into the world of, well, timeless wisdom, really, and from none other than Marcus Aurelius. You know, I love a good history lesson, but this isn't just about ancient Rome. We're talking about his meditations, those personal writings. You've brought us 45 powerful Marcus Aurelius lessons to unpack, so I'm ready to see how these insights he had are relevant to our lives even now, centuries later.
Yeah, and what I always find so fascinating about Marcus Aurelius is that he wasn't just a philosopher, right? He was the emperor of Rome, and during this incredibly tumultuous time for the empire, too. I mean, imagine juggling the pressures of ruling an empire with, you know, also trying to ponder the meaning of life.
It's mind-boggling, honestly. I think for anyone who might not be familiar with him, could you give us a little background? Who was Marcus Aurelius, and why should we care about what an emperor from, what, almost 2,000 years ago has to say to us now?
Okay, so Aurelius, he lived from 121 to 180 AD, right in the thick of the Roman Empire at its height. But what's interesting is, and what makes his writing still resonate with people, even after all these centuries, is, I think, the raw honesty in it. He wasn't trying to create some, like, perfectly polished philosophy for the masses. His meditations, they were personal, almost like a journal, really. He's grappling with these everyday struggles, dealing with stress, trying to find happiness, how to deal with difficult people and situations, you know, things we still deal with.
Totally. It's like we're getting a glimpse into the mind of an emperor, but also realizing, oh, he's human, just like me.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So you've gone through his meditations and you've given us these 45 kind of key lessons. Instead of going point by point, what were some of the big ideas that jumped out at you from all of that? What were some of the themes that really resonated with you? I think one of the core principles of Stoicism, that's the philosophy that Aurelius followed, is this idea of focusing on what you can control and then learning to accept what you can't. And this is a huge theme throughout his writing.
Totally. I mean, right out of the gate, quote number one is, you are the owner of your actions, not of their fruits. It's like such a clear way of saying, look, you can control what you do, but not always the outcome. That must have been a tough one to live by, even as an emperor.
Oh, absolutely. Such a powerful concept. And it comes up again and again. Like later in quote number 6, he says, the only thing that is truly ours that we can control is our reaction to things that happen outside of us. I mean, that's Stoicism in a nutshell, really.
It's so relevant, especially these days, I feel like with social media, the news cycle, everything. It's just constant, you know?
It's easy to get really caught up in all that chaos, you're right. Aurelius reminds us that we can kind of carve out this space of inner peace, but we have to focus on what we can influence, and that's our own thoughts, our own reactions.
It's like finding that eye of the storm. Like, how do we cultivate that? And that actually makes me think of another theme that came up a lot, happiness. Although he doesn't seem to define happiness in that, like, typical way we do today.
You're right. He really challenges this idea that happiness is something external, you know, like that it comes from having wealth or possessions or other people's approval. He even says, in quote number 2, happiness depends on the quality of your thoughts. It's a pretty bold statement.
Especially now. It's so interesting, though, he's not saying to reject all that stuff. He was an emperor, after all. More that true happiness is found internally.
Right. It's about finding this contentment in what you have while also still striving for things that you think are worthy, which he actually touches on that in quote 8, I think. It's this idea of aligning your actions with your values, like trying to really live authentically and finding that joy in that process of just being genuine.
So it's not about chasing these fleeting pleasures, but about cultivating that deeper sense of fulfillment, and that comes from within, which I like. It makes it an active pursuit, not something passive.
And that actually, you know what, that ties in with another major theme that you see a lot in his work, facing adversity. Because it's not like he was just this, philosopher king hanging out in an ivory tower. He was dealing with wars, plagues, internal conflicts.
Yeah, you don't get to be Emperor of Rome during a period of, like, peace and quiet by accident.
Right. He knew a thing or two about tough times.
It makes his perspective on dealing with challenges really hit differently.
Yeah, totally. He even frames it in this way, like in quote 9, he says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He didn't see these hard times as setbacks, but as chances to, practice virtue, cultivate resilience.
So it's not about just getting through it, it's about growing through it.
Exactly. He goes on to say in quote 38, does what's happened keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness, and all other qualities that allow a person's nature to fulfill itself? So remember this principle when something threatens to cause you pain. The thing itself was no misfortune at all. To endure it and prevail is the greatest good. It's about leaning into those challenges, knowing that we actually come out stronger.
That's so different from how we're often conditioned to think, right? Like we try to avoid being uncomfortable.
We do, but I think Aurelius would say that those are the moments where real growth happens.
So when you're thinking about those moments when you do feel like you're failing, because we all have them, how do we not get like totally in our heads about it?
Well, I think that's where, these Stoic practices of mindfulness really come in, and it's something he talks about a lot.
Which makes sense. If we're trying to control our reactions to things, being mindful in those moments is essential.
Totally.
Yeah.
And part of that is also, I think, what he was talking about earlier with, like, focusing on what you can control. Like, in quote 12, it never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. It's about not getting caught up in that external noise and focusing on that internal compass.
So relevant in the age of social media, right? It's so easy to get caught up in comparison.
Oh, 100%. He's basically saying log off, reconnect with yourself. He believed that that internal work, that continual self-reflection is crucial.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also feels a little easier said than done, you know? So how do we actually do this? It's one thing to read these quotes, but how do we live them?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the beauty of what he wrote is that he offers these like really timeless principles,
Uh-huh.
but he also realized that the application of them is going to look different for everyone.
So no, like Stoicism starter kit.
Not exactly, but what we can do is think about some real-life examples of how these things might actually play out.
Okay, I like that. Get practical. So let's unpack one of these ideas and think about how it works in real life. What about that one we were talking about before, about controlling our reactions? Because I feel like that's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely. Just think about how often throughout your day you just react to things impulsively. Like your commute is a nightmare.
Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on traffic. My inner monologue during rush hour is definitely not what you'd find in meditations.
Exactly. But, what if instead of letting those external factors completely dictate your emotional state, you take a breath?
Mm.
What if we actually took a page from Aurelius and hit pause, like actually make a choice about how we're going to respond?
So instead of instantly getting frustrated that I'm stuck in traffic again, I take some deep breaths and remind myself that I can't control this, and I use that time to listen to a podcast.
Right, you're choosing your response, which actually then influences how you experience that situation.
It's about finding these small opportunities throughout the day to apply this stuff. Like, we don't have to overhaul our entire lives. We can just make little changes. It's less about being a perfect stoic and more about being intentional, I guess.
It is. And, it's something that Aurelius talks about quite a bit, this idea that, it's a process. It's not about achieving this, like, perfect state of stoicism. It's about cultivating the right mindset.
Mm.
And, you know, that takes time.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not about looking for those quick fixes or easy answers, right? He was really saying this is something you work on your whole life.
Yeah, he was. And it's back to that idea of virtue being a journey, not the destination. He talks about that in meditations too. Like it's a practice. So something you have to work at every single day, just like, anything else you want to get good at, just like, physical exercise. The more you practice these things, these stoic principles, mindfulness, self-control, the stronger those mental muscles get.
So we don't have to beat ourselves up if we miss a day at the mental gym or forget to pack our stoic protein shake.
Not at all. In fact, Aurelius would probably say those failures, those are just more opportunities to practice that resilience, like we were saying before about adversity being a chance to really strengthen your character. I think that applies here too. Those moments where we feel like we're failing, those internal struggles, those are chances to grow.
Resilience is forged in the struggle. It's so true. And it's also way more encouraging, honestly. It's more compassionate than just being like, nope, you messed up, start over.
Right. It's more sustainable too.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that makes his philosophy so enduring, honestly,
Mhm.
because he was writing literally centuries ago, but these insights that he had still feel incredibly relevant, like no matter what time you're living in.
It's true. Like he had a way of cutting through everything and getting right to the heart of things, to what it really means to be human, to live a good life, even when things are tough. So, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into these 45 lessons, what's one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with? If there was one thing you want them to remember from Marcus Aurelius, what would it be?
Well, we've spent all this time talking about his wisdom, right? And it's easy to like put him on this pedestal. Oh, Marcus Aurelius, this wise Roman emperor. But I think it's important to remember that the world he was living in was very different from ours.
He didn't have to deal with Twitter trolls or, rush hour traffic.
Right. So here's something to consider as you're going through all of this. How might his philosophy need to adapt to fit the unique challenges of the 21st century? What would Marcus Aurelius say about, our digital age,
Mm-hmm.
about just a constant information overload in everything?
Ooh, that's a really good question. It's almost like a challenge to everyone listening, right? Take these lessons, see how they fit into your life, but also don't be afraid to make them your own. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly. And he knows you might be inspired to go and start your own meditations journal.
that's a great idea. Maybe just, keep it a little more private than Marcus Aurelius did with his, though.
Probably a good call.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing these 45 powerful Marcus Aurelius lessons to the table today. This has been a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.